CrowdStrike stops breaches. These days, critical work isn't done from the protection of a corporate network. It happens at cafes, back offices, and at home. New ways of working mean new attacks. New attacks require new defenses. CrowdStrike stops breaches so you can do what you do best. CrowdStrike, we stop so you can go. CrowdStrike is offering Security Weekly listeners 15 days free access to its platform. See how it works at securityweekly.com/CrowdStrike. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to Security Weekly Virtual Hacker Summer Camp 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this segment, a very good friend, Corey Bodzin, who's the Chief Technology Officer at deepwatch. Corey, welcome back to Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks for having me again. It's always fun to get together, Matt.
It is. I was just counting. The last 5 companies you've worked for are either previous or current sponsors. I can only thank you for deepwatch, but that's okay. For people who don't know, Corey and I have a long history of working together at Qualys and Tenable and RSA and back and forth. I came here and you've gone a couple other places, so congratulations on the new gig over at deepwatch.
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of fun, and I figured I needed to get a C title so I could keep up with you. But I am looking forward to that day when we get to work together again.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about LensScore, which is a new. It's a benchmarking tool, I think, right, for SecOps maturity. Give us an overview, kind of the concept behind LensScore, and then I want to get into what's LensScore going to help organizations do.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk about it. Deepwatch LensScore is our first product offering actually here at Deepwatch. And it came about, we're an MDR services company. We spent a lot of time talking to CISOs. And what we often heard from CISOs, they were always asking the same 3 questions. They wanted to know, what's the current state? What's the maturity of my SecOps organization? Don't just give it to me in a vacuum, but tell me how that compares to my chosen peer group, be it my industry, in my vertical or similar size. And then, because, time is precious for all of us, but probably triply so for CISOs, don't just give me a list of the 500 things that I could do. Give me the one best recommendation about what I should do to improve my effectiveness. And we heard that so often, and we thought, you know what? We had this maturity model that we were used to working with our customers on, and we're in the midst of patenting our maturity model version 2 that brings a real scientific way to measure, are you collecting all the right data? Are you using all the right analytics? Do you have the appropriate coverage throughout your environment? We thought that we needed a way to surface that maturity score, surface industry benchmarks, surface recommendations in a really friendly, easy-to-use way. And that was what drove us to create the Deepwatch LensScore product.
Now, we've done this in other industries in our past. ClearPoint Metrics, Lumen. There's been other attempts to do this. And one of the challenges has always been, how taking the results and really giving a good set of recommendations and getting value out of these maturity models and these benchmarking products, right? And so what kind of thoughts went into really making this valuable for those people that are going to participate and use this type of tool?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I've been in a bunch of companies where I've tried to do this, and we talked a lot about the notion of how do we actually make this useful and what's missing from scores. And there are a lot of good products out there. I like Lumen Cyber Exposure Score. Full disclosure, Tenable's a partner of ours. I like companies like Security Scorecard and BitSight, the folks at RiskLens. But what they all do is they all kind of give you here's a score, and it's hard to put together why you have that score. It's hard to understand what you can do to affect that score. And even when you get information about here are things you could do, they tend to be more generic kind of recommendations of, CASB is really good for you. And maybe it's true if you're an all cloud company, but in a manufacturing, there may be an awful lot of on-prem where maybe CASB is not the best recommendation. And so those are some of the things. First, we'd want to capture our maturity model. Our maturity model is reasonably sophisticated. The math has actually passed me. Once they got into logistic algorithms, I hung up my hat. But it does incorporate a variety of factors, and it weights them according to context. And context is something that we uniquely have with our customers. We're embedded with their SecOps team. We understand their environment. We understand their business drivers. And so for our customers, we're able to pull in all sorts of context to say, you have a maturity score of 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. But it's not just, hey, 5's bad, you should be up to 6, you should be up to 7. We can say instead, 5 is actually roughly where your peer groups land. It's roughly what we would expect. Or, here's a gap that we know we have. And if you were able to add this particular data source, maybe give us your Microsoft Active Directory log so that we can see credential misuse, maybe evidence of lateral movement, something like that. Maybe instead of adding a technology, we say, look, you've got cyber reason for your EDR. It's fantastic. You're only 10% deployed. If you could get up to 20% deployed, it would bump your score up considerably. And it's maybe lower effort because you already know how to do it. It's just a matter of rolling out more. That context and being able to turn that into those concise recommendations of here's the most impactful thing you could do takes into account not just how good the technology may be, but what it means to you, what it means to your business, and really reflects some of the idea of the level of effort. That's where we think we get to be really unique. And we're not trying to solve, for the whole set of security, maybe someday. But right now, we're very targeted on SecOps and your SOX maturity level. And so in that context, we have a unique vantage point in the industry and with our customers to really make effective recommendations and help, share some knowledge and best practices.
Yeah, I think you bring up two very valid points that I think has been a struggle when we've tried to do this in the past in other markets. Context is a big portion of this, right? We talk about this from a risk perspective all the time. You need context, right? You need to understand the environment. You need to understand criticality of assets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what I think slowed a lot of things down in the vulnerability management space when we've attempted to do this in the past. And sometimes when people try to add context, Corey, they limit it to a handful of things that you can configure. But context is more complex than that. So how have you thought about what are the different elements that come into context that really drive the math behind the algorithms?
Yeah, that's a great question. And context is really hard. The notion of what your assets are and what's important to you is something I've actually talked about throughout my career. And when we were together at Tenable, one of the things I heard at one of our customer advisory boards, I'll never forget, made an impact on me. We had a major auto manufacturer was talking. We were talking about how do you decide what your important assets are? And we were going down this path of, the systems that control your production or your supplier chain is really critical. And she had raised her hand and she said, in our country, the unions we have really rigorous rules. And so actually, one of the most critical systems we have are our commissary payment processing systems. Because if our workers can't get lunch because we can't take a credit card, our factory shuts down because they're allowed to go home. And that's the kind of thing you don't find by just pulling technical data. You don't get that information by talking at a high level about, our data centers and our servers. You actually have to be talking to the practitioners, the business owners who really understand what drives their business. And that's something we capture at deepwatch. When we talk with customers, we understand those nuances about, yeah, well, it looks like this might be critical. Here's what really makes our business hum. And then our algorithm is able to adjust for that notion of the importance of those assets, the impact to the business, what the effectiveness of controls would be. And something like, a point of sale unit for a commissary, you don't want to make a recommendation about you should have an EDR agent on there. It's probably not feasible. That's probably a case where we really want to get some good logging flowing into the SIM. So those are some of the things we try to account for. And I'd be lying if we said we had all that, but that's we started with the maturity score a while back. We're just patenting version 2. We have plans, I joke with my team about, we're going to incorporate that into version 3, version 10, version 719. So we really expect to grow this as we get feedback, as we get more data, and as we really hear from people, here are the attributes we want to catch. And here are the things that really provide that useful context.
Yeah, we had Doug Hubbard on Business Security Weekly Tuesday night, and he was talking about, look, no algorithm is perfect. What you have to do is minimize uncertainties, which means you're going to iterate through this algorithm multiple times over, to your point, to 719, because you're going to find another element that reduces the amount of uncertainty in your scores, and therefore you're going to incorporate that and make those measurements even better.
That's right, and we have, hopefully our viewers will try logging in. We'll get to the tagline on that later. But in our deepwatch Lens Score product, there are areas where we provide very specific discrete values. There are a lot of areas where we fall back to ranges or simply high, medium, low, and that we do that to reflect that level of uncertainty. And as Hubbard said, I think it was in How to Measure Anything, or maybe it was in How to Measure Anything in Security. Any bit of data you get that helps you make better decisions is good, even if it's not precise. And that's something we've really taken into account in our algorithm. We tried, and in our presentation, is to make sure we're giving you information that helps you make better decisions. We'll keep refining it to help even pinpoint those decisions more.
Now, the second point I want to get on is the actionability of the results, right? This is the big thing that's always kind of limited us in our past, which is, okay, let's assume I have enough context to prioritize. It's really, how do I then take that prioritized list and make it actionable? So to walk me through some of those different action steps. You score the environment. Now I have to make it actionable for me to really figure out how to improve my maturity from one step to the next. It's that actionability. So how do you really accomplish that well with what's happening in Lens Score?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So there are 3 key components to the score I talked about. I'm going to take them in reverse order. The first one that we have a direct ability to provide action on is asset coverage. Great example, Cybereason and an EDR partner of ours. We have customers who want to deploy it, and we know what percentage of their environment they've got deployed against. And it's very easy to come up with an action plan of increasing that percentage, of increasing the coverage, and also knowing, by the way, where you stop. But 100% might not make any sense. You might be able to get plenty of visibility and the capabilities you need covering 50% or 70%. So we start there with asset coverage, or that's one of the components. We also have a notion of our use case analytics. That's actually what we do with the data we collect. And when we onboard customers of varying maturity levels, sometimes customers are not ready for us to turn on all of those analytics. Maybe they're not in a position to take action on them. Maybe it requires very specific tuning to make sure that the signal to noise ratio is appropriate. And those are the kind of things that often happen during onboarding. You make certain decisions that you want to revisit, but memories and busyness being what they are, it doesn't always come back. So we make that a really important part of the recommendations of the algorithm as well, is, hey, you're giving us all the data we need to detect things like lateral movement, but some of these analytics we had turned off because we needed to tune it. So our number one recommendation to you is let's sit down with one of our detection engineers and do the tuning. Those are two areas where we have some really key insights just from our day-to-day operations with our customers. Then another really important point is actually having the data, having the technologies and the capabilities. And this is where we have great partners like GuidePoint, and we have great experience, right? We can say things like, we know, we fully adopted a Beyond Corp model here. We think that MFA is a really important capability, and it adds a lot to customer SecOps maturity. We don't, we're fine if you want to use RSA or if you want to use Duo. And we don't make any recommendation on the technology, but we do have partners who can help and guide. And GuidePoint is a great example. They bring a lot of expertise to the table of, in your industry, we've seen that this product's been a really good fit financially, from a deployment standpoint, et cetera. So we can seamlessly do that handoff to say, if you really do want this 1 or 2 point increase in maturity score, here are the people who can help you understand what it'll cost, what the level of effort is, can even bring a team to help you make it so. And that's really where, to your point, you and I think, both worked at Qualys when Ann Johnson was there, and she said something great that has always stuck with me, right, about a customer saying, you've told me the 100 things I should go fix or the 10,000 things I should go fix, and I hope you sleep well tonight. We tried to be really deliberate on this of not just saying, here's the 100 things you should do, but actually here's the plan to do it so that you can do one and, as a CISO, really sleep well that night.
If people, how long does it take to fill out the questionnaire to give you that? If a CISO is going to go log in, how long should they kind of set aside to actually get through it?
Yeah, so when I joined deepwatch, I used the thought experiment of, suppose we're at Black Hat, we're going to have 1,000 people walk up to the booth. How do we make sure that in 90 seconds they've got value? We're obviously all still at home, but virtually that's still the target we've gone for. So our initial release of Deepwatch Lens Score, the notion is we model, is tabletop modeling. We load a set of defaults based on what we know about various industry profiles. And so within 15 seconds of logging in, you've got a score and you've got recommendations. Now, you'll then want to go and tune it to what your exact environment looks like. And that doesn't take that long, to be honest. It can be done in a couple of minutes where you can model out, I think I have these technologies, I have these capabilities. We make some assumptions for people who are not customers of ours about coverage and use case analytics. And within a few minutes, you've got what we call a potential score. It's where we think we could be with the level of information that we have. Now, if you want to get a more exact score, your actual score, we have a call to action in the product. Our team will reach out to you, and then we'll go through a deeper dive. That still only takes an hour, couple of hours, depending on how thorough you want to be, how large your environment is, where we'll ask some questions about your infrastructure, your cloud usage, things like that. But anybody should, within a few minutes, be able to get an idea of where they're at. And within a couple hours of chatting, know exactly where they're at and what they should do next.
That's great. Corey, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to a day when we can both get on a plane and have a beer, or in this case, a sake together.
Yes, absolutely. Anybody who wants to log in and get their maturity score, please visit deepwatch.com/lens-score. And with that, we'll take a short break and come back with more interviews from Virtual Hacker Summer Camp. Welcome to Security Weekly's Virtual Hacker Summer Camp 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is Michael Sanders. He's a senior engineer with ExtraHop, who has been a great sponsor of ours. Michael, welcome to Security Weekly.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, this is your first interview on Security Weekly. We've had a lot of your folks on over the years, so I said I'd take it easy on you. Give us an overview of kind of your role at ExtraHop first before we dig into some of the detection and response conversation we want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm actually newer on my particular team, but I'm on our specific cloud and security overlay team. So So I worked with a number of guys, and one of our guys actually had to bail on you at the last second. And so they were like, hey, send the new guy.
There you go. Yeah, it was probably Matt Cawthorn or somebody like that. I mean, Matt's been on multiple times, so we'll dig on him later. So we want to talk detection and response, and what we want to start to talk about, I think, is kind of what's the latest trends when we think about what's happening with telework, right? We've seen a massive amount of move from people on-prem, where you used to be able to monitor east-west traffic on your network. Now they're at home, they're remote. What's changed when it comes to detecting and responding to incidents when we've got a bunch of remote workers hanging around?
So when we start talking about detection and response, and we use, this post-compromised world is what we kind of consider everything. The biggest difference is, like you said, where they're coming from and how they're accessing. Now then, what happens and the vectors of attack and how lateral movement works hasn't really changed. So with regards to the actual detection capabilities, it's the same, but being able to understand is what gets really, really important. And that's one of the things that we've really focused on, is being able to tell what that outside person looks like outside, what they look like on the inside as they're doing their work. So we actually do some stitching across to make sure that we know who's who in those dynamic environments.
Now, when you say stitching, I assume you're talking about some NetFlow data, maybe some log data. What are you using to actually stitch together that picture to say, this is what a remote user looks like when he's at home, and this is what that remote user looks like when he's connected to the VPN or interacting with a cloud service or something like that? Can you explain kind of what you're doing there?
Yeah, so actually it's magic sauce. And so this is just our capability to understand. And what we can do is, as folks come in through like a VPN concentrator or something along those lines, whether it's your firewall or whether it's a concentrator, we can actually see that outside connection and we can match it to the inside connection. And so that gives us the ability to, even though it's a totally encrypted session outside, we know who it is, where they're coming from, and we can identify them based off of credentials or logins or whatever. And then on that DHCP pool on the inside, we know who they are, so we can see what they're doing on the inside with regards to that lateral movement. And this gets real important when you start talking about this quick move to remote work and work from home, where a lot of folks didn't have the capacity. So they've been turning on split tunneling so that they're not bogged down with traffic. You've got people using home computers logging in for the first time ever. So there's just a lot of gray area that we all jumped into because of this force to move home.
Yeah. Now, can you tell the difference? If you see the connection coming in through the VPN, how much visibility do you have into the remote PC device when it's in a split tunnel mode and maybe not all the traffic's coming through the VPN? Can you see that or can't you see that? I'm curious how far you extend into that home networking environment.
So, and this brings up a very valid point about the concerns that everybody should be having today. And that's because depending on how you configure a lot of these different services is what is going to give that visibility. And so that's where a lot of legacy products are really falling down and can't see a lot of things. Whereas, somebody like ExtraHop, we still do all of our device profiling. And so we know what that device is, even though it's not here. We can see all of its like LDAP calls coming across the tunnel. If DNS is coming across the tunnel, we see all of that. So we can see everything that they're accidentally communicating, I guess is what you would say. Even though it's not really an accident, it's how we configure things so that we get the data that we need. With regards to, can I see what you're surfing in your incognito window? No, you're still safe. Don't worry. I'm not investigating that much. Be careful on your DNS queries, though. Got
it. Well, that's a good tip for all of us to keep our in our split tunnels. Use your incognito window. Now, we also have seen a lot of move to more cloud services, and ExtraHop's done a lot there on the cloud side. How does this now change some of what you can see in the cloud side, right? Let's assume I'm not going through my VPN, right? I'm not connecting to the corporate network because I'm going straight out to Amazon or maybe a SaaS provider, something like that. What do you now see and what do you now do to monitor that network traffic with some of the recent cloud enhancements that ExtraHop's put in place?
Yeah, so we're a very cloud-oriented organization, hence my role in my team. And as you mentioned, Matt, that you work with a ton. So one of the big things that we see, and a lot of customers didn't realize they were accidentally doing it at the time. One of the big deals is because of split tunneling or because of those scenarios, a lot of the infrastructure that got pushed into the cloud because of the quick necessity to expand or whatever that compute footprint, a lot of cloud adoption exists. And one of the problems is somebody going direct because you weren't planning on that. And so realistically, you've got to expand your security footprint into the cloud. When we talk about cloud security, a lot of organizations are lagging in their cloud security versus their data center. And you really have to take that hybrid approach. It is just necessary.
Yeah, and I think what you guys have done is interesting is where you can now sit in those cloud environments and actually pull those packets in, because it's providing a level of visibility you may not have had before, especially if you're not forcing those remote workers through a VPN.
Absolutely. And that is one of the beauties of all of the cloud providers have recognized that deep packet analysis and being able to look at actual network traffic is very, very important. And they've all committed to try to support that. AWS is kind of the front runner right now with their VPC traffic mirroring. Google's doing a really good job. Microsoft came out early out of the gate. They've had a hiccup. They're back into beta, I think. So they're trying to work with that. But of course, we've been in there long before any of the cloud providers started giving us packets, and we were using our own techniques or other methods to be able to get that deep wired data that really is that truth, right? So that part of the puzzle that can't be messed with is the network data. And that's how we understand so much stuff and can see so much stuff.
Yeah, so now you've extended visibility for some of these folks. If they're using cloud services or coming through the VPN, you have a lot more visibility capabilities now than maybe most organizations potentially would have had in place before. How does that now improve incident response and the ability to mitigate potential issues, right? You've got the visibility. Now, how do you stitch all this together from an ExtraHop perspective to make it really easy for a SOC team that might also now be remote, by the way, right? Because they may not be sitting in their security operations center. How do you make it easy for them to look for these potential attacks and threats so that they can respond quickly to prevent some sort of breach in data?
Yeah, and this goes back to that concept of 100% visibility is what you really need to be able to respond to a threat. So when we talk about an incident switching to a breach or whatever the case may be, and us detecting this post-compromised scenario, remember, nothing's changed in the last 30 years in internet security. You pop a box, you get some credentials, you do some lateral movement, data staging, and exfiltration, right? So that initial incident is very, very hard in a modern environment to protect against. We all kind of account for the fact that we know a compromise is going to happen or an incident is going to happen. Keeping it from getting to that breach is what you're talking about here. Getting that detection, being able to respond to that. And it requires that 100% visibility. Whether it's, that remote worker coming into the data center for credential access, or you're hitting into that cloud, being able to see all of that, gathering that data, and being able to see those stages of the attack, those steps of the attack, and keeping it from becoming a breach is what really, really matters. And again, it's just that 100% visibility, whether it's us or whether it's all your other tools. You've got to kind of get your hands around all of it in order to be able to know what you're looking for, be able to see it, and then be able to respond to it after that initial compromise.
Yeah, because I might get the home PC, I get on it, I get on the VPN, I get into the data center. Now I have to make sure that any potential lateral movement compromise, any data exfiltration that might be happening in the data center and or the cloud now, right? Because we were talking about the cloud capabilities. That's where having that visibility is you might have gotten popped, but maybe the full breach hasn't happened yet because the data exfiltration phase hasn't happened. And that's where the visibility at this network traffic layer, both at the data center and the cloud, is really where the advantage for what ExtraHop's doing is. Is that right?
100%. That's a huge advantage for us. And we want to talk about us. We can do that all day long. But I think as security professionals as a whole, we're going to see so many more incidents this year because of opening that front door much bigger with those home PCs coming to the data center, people being able to access the cloud. We're definitely opening that front door much larger. So we are going to see more incidents. We're going to see more shots on goal. The issue is, as a security professional, we have to stop the breach from happening. So paying attention to that lateral movement is going to be critical.
Yeah. And so are you seeing the attacks change, or are you just seeing more of specific types of attacks now trying to get in, now that I've extended the perimeter basically to the house?
I think what we're seeing is some new stuff. A lot of it is still tried and true methods. And, it comes back to that initial exploit or that initial vulnerability. We can't necessarily put endpoints on every single one of our workers' home PCs. That's a tremendous undertaking, making sure it's updated, things of that nature. So just going ahead and assuming that compromise is going to happen. Again, this is that whole post-compromise concept that we're kind of focused on. We got to assume that that's going to happen. And it's going to come across the wire somehow, some way. And most likely it's coming across the wire encrypted, right? Because they already have that foothold. So being able to get that complete visibility, which is something that we can do with our decryption capabilities. And, even if it's TLS 1.3, we can still take a peek inside that packet and be able to see that next step, right? The credential harvesting, the privilege escalation, that lateral movement to hit into to where the data is, the keys to the kingdom, and see that data staging. So being able to catch all that before the exfil is what really, truly we've got to focus on this year, and we've got to get better at it.
Yeah, I mean, now the endpoint vendors would say, no, put endpoints on all those home PCs.
Absolutely.
They want that, right? I mean, to be honest. But to do that logistically is probably pretty tough. I mean, because in most cases, it might not even be a corporate-owned device. It could be, somebody's personal device that's now being used for these connections. And so it could be very difficult to get an endpoint visibility on that device. And so the next thing you have to rely on is network traffic. Do you, because again, you're going to see DNS requests, other requests, command and control traffic. I mean, those are all your typical signs that you're looking for when it comes to this kind of exfiltration, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've taken BYOD to the next level this year, right? Just as you pointed out, we have no idea what devices anybody's connecting from anymore. And so the big thing is exactly what you said. Once things start to happen, once those Kerberos connections start getting made, LDAP, like all of that credential harvesting, trying to bounce to the next one. We're even still, we still got patch the hasses happening. I mean, like, nothing's really changed from the technique and behavior aspect. Yes, individual exploits or whatever have changed, individual vulnerabilities change, but the behavior never changes. And so that's where the behavioral analysis, some of the machine learning stuff that we do is where that bread and butter is, right? Being able to figure out what's different and how they're reacting. That's where we pick up all of that great detection capability. And then you can deep dive into it for the response side.
Yeah, same attacks, probably just a little more in volume right now.
Much more volume. We're seeing just tons and tons of stuff hitting. RDP ports are just getting absolutely swamped from an external perspective. With regards to a lot of these new attacks that we're seeing, DNS stuff is getting really, really sketchy because of folks that are trying to redirect, the endpoint away from the corporate, security tools and aspects and trying to move that. So, I mean, there's just a lot of weirdness that's happening right now. But the one thing that we can control is where that data sits, right? That data is sitting on a server in your data center or in the cloud, your virtual data center. And so being able to get that complete visibility and protect that data is kind of the new name of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge for people, for sure. I mean, we've seen a lot with VPN capacity challenges and where data's going and traffic's going. As long as you can protect the data source and make sure that you have visibility around where that data is being stored, that's a big part of the battle at this point in making sure that it's being protected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you're spot on right there. And, one of the big things, and I had to double check the statistic this morning from the Verizon report for last year, we still have this mean time to detection, is months in like a quarter of, incidents. We've got to fix that as well. We can't have that this year. Given the high number of incidents we're going to see, we can't let it just simmer, right? We've got to go ahead and stop it. We've got to detect it. We've got to remediate this so that we don't start having massive breaches.
Yeah, we were looking at an article yesterday on that point that even with ML, the average was still like 197 days to detect. I'm like, isn't that like the average with just regular humans in the mix? I mean, so what improved?
Exactly. So that is a weird thing. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is making sure that when we tell you need to look at something, you actually need to look at it. The high rate of like, the alert cannon concept of just like, hey, this signature pop, this signature pop, this signature pop. Well, it's a false positive. Well, that doesn't help us as security professionals. There's just too much to investigate. So making sure that the quality of alerting is what matters. And I think that was what really helps a lot of our customers is being able to guarantee that if we tell them it's a problem, it's a problem. And so that helps get focused and try to, take care of the stuff that's important so it doesn't just sit there and go by the wayside.
Yeah. And with the SOC team probably being a little bit remote, giving them specific alerts that are actionable that they can focus on and they don't have to worry about the false positives is probably a net positive at the end of the day, because it's going to be hard enough to do their job, especially if they're in a remote capacity.
I mean, it was hard enough in a SOC. How many times have you walked into a SOC and somebody is, playing Call of Duty or watching TV? If that problem existed in the SOC, imagine it when these folks are sitting at home. Yeah. Getting folks to get laser focused on those really important security incidents, being able to have a nice way to investigate, and then, that last step of the response, whether it's locking down a host, blocking somebody off the corporate VPN, figuring out that remediation step is very, very important.
Yeah, agreed. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
All right, and thanks for taking it easy on me.
If anybody wants to learn more about ExtraHop, please visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. You can also request a free trial of Reveal X360 by visiting extrahop.com/SWBH. That's Security Weekly Black Hat abbreviation. And with that, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back with more interviews on Virtual Hacker Summer Camp.